You know, our bodies are made of trillions of cells, and literally millions of them die every single day. But it's not just that they die that's important, it's how they die that really matters. So let's dive into this hidden world of cellular life and death, and the two major ways a cell can meet its end. One by a careful program design, and the other by a complete disaster. It sounds like a pretty strange riddle, doesn't it? But the answer, believe it or not, reveals a deep truth about how our bodies are built and, well, how they break down. The common thread here is cell death. But as we're about to see, not all cell death is created equal. Not by a long shot. Okay, so meet our two main players. On one side, we've got apoptosis, an orderly, pre-planned, clean exit. On the other side is necrosis, a chaotic, violent collapse that's usually caused by some kind of injury. Think of it like this. It's the difference between a building being carefully dismantled, piece by piece, and a building just suddenly exploding. Right, let's start with the orderly one, apoptosis. Now, far from being some kind of tragedy, this is actually a vital, pre-programmed process that's happening inside you all the time. You can think of it as a cell recognizing that its time is up and then kicking off its own clean, controlled disassembly. Apoptosis isn't just about death. It's also about life and creation. It's incredible, really. When you were in the womb, your hands and feet actually started out webbed, kind of like a duck. Apoptosis is the process that removes those cells in between, sculpting your individual fingers and toes. And throughout your whole life, it's what replaces old, worn-out skin cells with fresh, new ones. It is, for sure, the body's most essential housekeeping service. So how does a cell even get the message that it's time to self-destruct? Well, there are two main ways. The first one is called the intrinsic pathway. This gets triggered when the cell itself is under stress, maybe from radiation or some internal damage, or even a dangerous lack of oxygen called hypoxia. It's basically an internal alarm bell telling the cell, hey, I'm compromised and it's time to bow out gracefully. And this slide just lays it out perfectly. A stress signal activates these proteins that basically poke holes in the mitochondria, the cell's power plants. This lets other key proteins leak out and they assemble into this structure called an apoposome. You can think of this as the foreman of a demolition crew. It then kicks off something called a caspase cascade, which is this chain reaction of enzymes, each one activating the next, just like a line of dominoes falling. And these enzymes are the demolition crew, systematically and very quietly taking the cell apart from the inside out. Okay, so the second method is the extrinsic pathway, and this is when the signal comes from the outside. An immune cell, for instance, might spot a cell that's old, infected, or maybe even cancerous, and it sends a signal by binding to a special death receptor right on its surface. It's basically a tap on the shoulder from the body's security force, saying, hey your time is up. And here's the really cool part. No matter which pathway gets triggered, the end result of apoptosis is incredibly clean. The cell just shrinks down and breaks into these neat little membrane-bound packages. Then, immune cells called macrophages come along, gobble them up, and recycle all the materials. No mess, no fuss, and absolutely no inflammation. All right, let's flip the coin now and talk about the other side, necrosis. If apoptosis is that controlled demolition we talked about, necrosis is an uncontrolled explosion. This is unplanned cell death, and it's caused by a severe injury. We're talking things like infections, toxins, or a sudden loss of blood supply. And this slide really shows just how catastrophic this failure is. The injury damages the mitochondria, so they can't produce ATP anymore, which is the cell's main energy source. Without that energy, the pumps that control the flow of water and ions just fail. Sodium floods into the cell, water follows right behind it, and the cell just swells up like a balloon until it violently bursts open. And this is the crucial point. When that cell bursts, all of its guts, all its internal contents, spill out into the surrounding tissue. This is a massive red flag for the immune system. It rushes to the scene and triggers a huge inflammatory response. Now, this response is meant to clean up the mess, but it can also cause a ton of collateral damage to the healthy neighboring cells. Now, it turns out this messy death isn't a one-size-fits-all kind of deal. The way a cell explodes can look very different depending on the tissue and the type of injury. So let's take a quick tour of the 6 main flavors of necrosis. First up is coagulative necrosis. This is the classic type you see when blood flow to an organ gets cut off, and it's deprived of oxygen. That condition is called ischemia, and it's exactly what happens during a heart attack. The cell dies, but its basic structure actually stays intact for a little while, almost like a ghost of its former self. So what's actually happening here? Well, the injury causes all the proteins inside the cell to denature and kind of congeal, almost like what happens when you cook an egg. This leaves the tissue firm, but dead, with this really distinct gel-like texture. It becomes this ghostly imprint of the organ that used to be there. Next is liquefactive necrosis. And yeah, as the name suggests, this one is all about turning tissue into liquid. This happens when the cell gets completely digested by powerful enzymes. It's really common in the brain after a stroke, or maybe inside a bacterial abscess where immune cells are releasing enzymes to fight off an infection. This is a great, if maybe a little gruesome, way to picture it. These powerful enzymes just turn the dead tissue into a creamy, thick liquid that's just full of cellular junk. And in the case of an abscess, that liquid is what we all know as pus. Then we've got caseous necrosis, which is kind of a unique hybrid of the first two types. It's most famously linked with tuberculosis. What happens is the immune system tries to wall off the bacteria, and it creates this battleground where the cells die, but they don't get completely broken down. And this battleground results in a really distinctive appearance. The dead tissue isn't solid like in coagulative necrosis, and it's not liquid like in liquefactive. Instead, it's soft, it's white, and it's crumbly, giving it a look that's often described as being cottage cheese-like. It's a total hallmark sign of a tuberculosis infection. The last three types are a little more specialized. First, you've got gangrenous necrosis. That's what happens when a limb, like a foot, loses its blood supply, causing the tissue to become dry and mummified. Next is fat necrosis, which happens after trauma to fatty tissue, like in the pancreas. Here, fatty acids get released, and they combine with calcium to form these hard, chalky deposits. And finally, there's fibrinoid necrosis, which is specific damage to blood vessel walls, often caused by things like autoimmune reactions or really severe high blood pressure. This table is a fantastic summary of all the different phases of necrosis. Just notice how the texture, whether it's gel-like, creamy, cheesy, or even chalky, gives doctors a huge clue about what the underlying cause is, whether it's a lack of oxygen, an infection, or physical trauma. Each type tells its own unique story about what went wrong inside the body. So, we've seen the two extremes, right? The quiet, orderly exit of apoptosis and the loud, chaotic explosion of necrosis. Let's bring it all together for the final takeaway. So, what's the really crucial difference here? Well, apoptosis is programmed. It's common and it's clean. It's basically the body's recycling program, and it completely avoids inflammation. Necrosis, on the other hand, is always caused by an injury. It's a messy, chaotic explosion, and its defining feature is the inflammatory collateral damage it causes to all the healthy tissue around it. And why does any of this matter? Because our health literally depends on this delicate balance. We need apoptosis to constantly renew and sculpt our tissues without causing any damage. And we need to understand necrosis to know what's happening when things go terribly wrong, like in a heart attack or a severe infection. It's this daily dance between order and chaos, all happening at a microscopic level. This elegant system of programmed cell death protects us every single day. But that leads to one final, critical question. What happens when it fails? What happens when cells that are supposed to die don't, or when they die way too easily? Well, the answers to those questions lead us directly to some of the biggest challenges in all of medicine, from cancer to autoimmune diseases. But that, well, that's a story for another explainer.